started. Now I have to turn the mic on. My name is Jay Bell. I'm Associate Dean of Academic Programs for the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences. And I certainly want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for coming out tonight. The weather wasn't all that great, but I know we have the intrepid of the intrepid, here with us this evening. This event is being hosted by the CFANS Deans Engaged Leaders Program. This is a 2-year opportunity that's available to all of our incoming students that have been admitted to CFANS. The program provides a unique opportunity for students to explore leadership questions in the context of civic and community engagement with a strong focus on how leadership emerges and is expressed in different cultural communities. We're now in our 2nd year of the program, and just a couple of weeks ago our students were up at the White Earth Indian Reservation where they learned about leadership in the context of a Native American culture. Kao Kalia's Yang's book, The Latehomecomer, was a shared reading for this group of students who came in this fall, and we're very privileged this evening to have the author here with us. Kao Kalia Yang graduated from Carleton College with a bachelor's degree in American Studies, Women and Gender Studies, and Cross-Cultural Studies. She received her Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction Writing from Columbia University in New York. She's been a recipient of the Page Scholarship by the Page Education Foundation for demonstrated leadership, academic achievement, and community commitment. She has received the Gilman International Award for International Spirit in the Practice of Diplomacy and the Freeman in Asia Scholarship towards the study of international and intranational models of development. Yang also received Columbia University School of Arts Dean's Fellowship, the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for Exceptional Leadership, Originality, and Potential to Change the Landscape of American Society. She's a 2008 recipient of the Spirit of Carleton College Award, and most recently, here in 2009, the Latehomecomers won Minnesota Book Award for Memoir and Creative Nonfiction, as well as Reader's Choice Award, and this is the first book ever to have won 2 awards at that competition. The Latehomecomer, a Hmong family memoir, is one of the first memoirs by a Hmong writer released with national distribution by a literary press. Now, as I was looking through our guest speakers here website, she had a part of her autobiography that described how she felt about writing. And so I have a little bit of that I'd like to read just to sort of conclude my introduction here. So, and I quote, "For me, writing is desperate and it is fraught with passion. Passion that makes my fingers shake because it's moving faster than my mind, tangled in heart and caught in everyone else I adore. I do not dance, but I believe I know how some people are free to dance when I am covered in words and bathing in the current of me." It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Kao Kalia.
Thank you. Can you hear me? That was a lovely introduction, and I say this sincerely because I have to introduce people sometimes, and it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do because you're setting the tone for what happens next. So thank you, James. How many of you have been to a literary reading? Some, but for those of you who have not, we have a memory to make. This book was written for my grandmother Yuali, who never learned how to write, to my baby brother Maxwell, who would read the things that she never wrote. I don't believe in surprises, so I'm just going to read from, I'm going to read 3 different selections tonight, and they're from different parts of the book. If I'm any good at all, then they don't need an introduction. You will be there with me, living the experience. If I'm not good, then you will feel that I've done a bad job, and that's valid, and we can talk about that afterward because we'll have time. But it's really a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be at the institution that when I was a kid I dreamed about, because it was the institution that had graduated and educated so many of my teachers, So in the McDonough Housing Projects of St. Paul, you had two little girls who dreamt of one day coming to the University of Minnesota. And it's a pleasure to be here at last. The book begins with an epigraph. After the door closes. Before babies are born, they live in the sky where they fly among the clouds. The sky is a happy place, and calling babies down to earth is not an easy thing to do. From the sky, babies can see the course of human lives. This is what the Hmong children of my generation are told by our mothers and our fathers, by our grandmothers and our grandfathers. They teach us that we have chosen our lives, that the people who we would become, we had inside of us from the beginning. And the people whose worlds we share, whose memories we hold strong inside of us, we have always known. From the sky, I would come again. I began the book this way because I once said to my father that I hadn't chosen this life, that I didn't want things this way. Because I was a teenager and I had never been inside a movie theater before, and I wondered what kind of world is it that to be a kid has to imagine what the insides of a movie theater looked like. So I told him, I looked my father in the eye and I said that I hadn't chosen this life, that I didn't want things this way. My father, he looked at me for a long time and he said that he would choose me all over again if he could, and that a long time ago when I was flying up high in the sky with the clouds, I saw him and my mother walking without shoes and I chose to come down to them. My father said that what life would teach me is how strong my heart is, not how weak or how fragile. I didn't have anything to say to him after he said those words. But what life has taught me so far is that surrounded by wisdom without the experience, we don't know how to use it. And it's taken me a long time to be able to say it to my mom and dad and to say it to all of those who fought so long and so hard to get so many of us in this room right here, right now, in this moment, that I'm happy to try to be the ending that they were all waiting for. So this book is maybe a response to all of that. From this first part of the book, page 42. For those of you who've read the book, you have an idea where the story belongs, but for those of you who have not, let's see if we end up in the same place. A farmer on the road threw an old black t-shirt and a pair of tattered shorts at my father. The shirt hit him on the arm. The shorts fell to the ground in front of him. My father picked up the clothes and did not know whether to say thank you or not to the silent man who looked at him with unblinking eyes. My mother stopped her slow walking and waited for my father to put on the shirt and shorts. She loved him very much in that moment. She wanted to protect him from the life around them, but her baby held her back. I never thought I would see clothes thrown at my husband, she says, looking at the floor, as if all the years had not erased the memory. When he picked the clothes off the ground and tried to wipe the dirt away, I could not look. My mother could only wrap her arms more securely around us. Her long hair fell about her shoulders. There was nothing to tie it back with. The wind blew the long strands into her face. Her hair had dried since the crossing. She was a proud young woman. I wonder if she hid behind the curtain of her hair and sought comfort in the small, unmoving baby with the fluttering lids. The Thai soldiers spoke to them in Laotian. They were informed that there was a place for incoming refugees to register with a group called the United Nations. After their registration, they would be sent to a fenced compound where they would stay until further arrangements could be made. They were told that they were in Onkai, a Thai province, but that the refugee camp there was full. The soldiers told them that they were refugees now, a few people fleeing for a home. Like times before, they were told to follow the men with the guns. It was not such a long walk, but the farmers on the road stared at them, and every step felt stiff and hard. Maybe it was an hour, maybe it was less than that. They had no watches, and they were too tired to count the ticking of time. Too embarrassed in their rags with their hunger and their children with bones jutting from thin shoulders. An expression on one man's face is the memory that my mother and father both carried, even 25 years after the fact. It was only a look, but it said that we were not human, too poor to walk on the earth. It was in that image of that Thai man with his red and white turban wrapped around his head, looking at them making their way into his country, that my mother and father learned what it meant to be poor, to be without a home or clothing to hide in. The soldiers led them to a house my mother remembers as beautiful. It was wooden and it was on stilts, and the roof rose to the sky, and there were stairs that led from the ground to its patio. I wished even then to see the inside, but we could not go in. The Thai soldiers told them to wait outside. The group sat admiring the house, not saying very much, wondering what was going to happen. They were surprised when the soldiers returned with plates of rice and dried fish. It was only a little food, and the adults could not eat away the hunger, but they nibbled a little as the children ate. They watched as the children with their small, hurried, dirty hands put pieces of rice and fish into their open mouths. Like little birds, many of them to swallow the food. After the plates were empty, they noticed a bus waiting for them. The soldiers told them to get in. They would go to the UN compound to register as refugees of war. When they reached the compound, they noticed the wire fence as tall as two men standing on each other's shoulders. They were told to get to the bus and enter the gates. My family hesitated before the entrance. They had escaped from one country and had not expected to be captives in the next. My father's feet stilled. A Thai soldier punched him, and he fell to the ground. The man kicked him. My father got up as fast as he could, not to hit the man back, but because he did not want my mother and grandmother to see him on the ground. My father looked at the man, and he did nothing. He would tell me years later, "My heart hurt more than my body. The flesh can take blows, the heart suffers them." It was the first time I felt there would be no other place like Kao, the village where I was born. The soldier who hit me was an older man. I was like a prisoner. I stood still, and then I walked into the place they would keep me. And I kept thinking, I was a man too. I had a wife and a child, but it didn't matter because we had no home anymore. So from the clouds, I saw this man and I saw this woman, and they chose to come down to them. And they took me to a place called America. I was 6 years old. My mother and father told us not to look at the Americans. If we saw them, they would see us. For the first year and a half, we wanted to be invisible. Everywhere we went beyond the McDonough housing project, we were looked at and we felt exposed. We were dealing with a widespread realization that all Hmong people must do one of two things to survive in America: grow up or grow old. In the case of the noticeably young, the decision was made for us. For those who were older, the case was also easy to figure. Those marred by the war, impaired by the years of fighting, Social Security and disability were options. For my mother and father, already adults who had waited on life long before it was their time, the government stepped in and told them the welfare clock was ticking. She was 25, he was 28. They knew they wanted a chance to work, but they did not know how to keep that chance safe. So on the streets before the slanted brows of mostly white men, they held us close for security. On the hills of the McDonough housing project, the sun high in the summer sky, Hmong people practiced walking in America. Children struggling with their parents, holding on to them harder than ever before. Joe and I could no longer walk as we always had. The hands holding ours were more determined than before and also full of pressure. When I skipped, my mother told me falling on the pavement would hurt, so I struggled to match her rapid, nervous gait. When Doe limped, my father placed himself before her, protecting her with his body, and I watched her learn to stand strong for him. At night, the children looked at the white ceilings and remembered how it had been long ago and far away. We wondered if our parents on the high mountains of Laos had to relearn the basics of walking when they were our age, when the bombs fell and the craters broke into the earth, the paths of their lives shattered forever. That very first summer, I encountered the challenge of not getting what I wanted most, to see my grandma in California. I also wanted her to sit with me on our small front porch, talk with me from the windows of the townhouse, and tell me about how it had been when we were still together. Money, something that I had begged like a monk for in the dress of innocence, became a stumbling block. She'd arrived in America in late August with Uncle Lou's family. On the phone, her voice trilled in the distance, and though I could not see her tears, I felt them on my own face. Doug clamored with me for this thing that we both dearly wanted. Please let us all go see Grandma. Our mother and father shook their heads. It was not an explanation, it was a new fact in our lives. We did not have enough money. Facts are not enough for children. We asked questions. They tried to explain facts. Money is not something the heart makes. We were not convinced, but we knew that they wanted to see Grandma too, so we accepted it. On the telephone with Grandma's tears in her voice, our tears on our faces, we promised each other a future in America. We said, one day we'll find our way to you. This country is big, but it is not as big as our love for you. She cried. We could not hear what she was trying to say. We cried with her. I got teardrops on the receiver. I wanted to believe that the tears would reach her, but I knew they wouldn't. Only human beings can reach each other. Tears are just water, salty water that I cannot control, so they slip out of my eyes, down my cheeks, to my lips, to the tip of my tongue, until I wipe them away on my sleeve. I started dreaming about money. Dollar bills that folded into cylinders looked like trash cans and rolled around in my head, loud and angry, smooth and gentle. After my dreams, I made decisions. When I grow up, I'm going to have money. When I grow up, I'm going to never need money. When I grow up, I'll treat money so well that it will always want to stay with me. When I grow up, I'm going to hate money so much that it will be afraid of me and stay away from me. Money was like a person I had never known or a wall I had never breached before. It kept me away from my grandma. I saw no way to climb this wall. Sometimes I thought so much about money that I couldn't sleep. Money was not bills and coins or a check from welfare. In my imagination, it was much more. It was the nightmare that kept love apart in America. The welfare check arrived in our mailbox near the first of the month. We were a family of 4, so we got $605. Rent was $250, and our sponsor was teaching my father how to drive because a family cannot survive without a car in America. My parents had brought an old Subaru on monthly payments. After we paid for the car insurance, electricity, and natural gas, we were left with only $150 to spend on gas for the car, on Dial soap and Pert Plus shampoo, on extra light bulbs and vacuum bags for the old Eureka we received from a church basement, on Vaseline lotion and powder detergent so my mother could wash our clothes in the bathtub. Then there was the money we had to save to help pay for planned dinners to talk about life in America and for emergencies like sickness or death. We learned a lesson from our history. Hard times were inescapable, but when they came, wrong people would have to help wrong people survive. In our new life of now looking closely at Americans, of walking carefully on paved streets, of living without money, my family is sat in front of the black and white television and watched soap operas. My cousin's wife, who did not know English well, came over with her children and translated the dramas for us. The American people on television kissed and kissed and kissed. And I slipped my hands over my eyes and then carefully spaced my fingers apart and looked between them. My cousin and his wife had young children that cried all the time and drank bottles of cow milk. I worried that they would become like cow children. I watched the television and the days passed, one after the other. At night, the families gathered for long conversations, which were mostly about surviving in America, the same topic that the adults in my family had started the first night we arrived in the country. It was a conversation that would continue for the next 20 years. Life without money became much more than the things we wanted or could not do. It became the things I smelled and touched, the people I loved. It became the things I loved. We shopped from secondhand stores. Together we discovered the aisles of Goodwill and Savers. We learned about church basements, the piles of badly folded clothes and the smells that hung in the air, dust and mold mingling in dry places that had not seen sunlight or fresh air for far too long. Instead of the colorful skirts, my mother wore solid prints. And instead of soft fabric pants, my father wore jeans. My fingers crumpled the fabric of their changing wardrobe, and my eyes noted the absence of color. Amid all this, my mother and father tried to protect our visions of America. They said the used clothes were roadmaps of successful paths out of being poor, signs toward our happy futures in this country. They said watching television was a luxury. We should pay attention and learn something. Their smiles and their laughter were for us to cover up for the nothing in our lives. I missed my grandma, and I saw the used clothes on my parents. I felt the weight of the road before us. The only road signs I liked were the red ones put out by the ice cream trucks when children came answering its melody. When the ice cream truck started calling the children, my mother gave Doug and me quarters to buy the sweet treats. We handed the man in white clothes our quarters, and he handed us Camp's banana-flavored popsicles, cold in the palms of our hands, in the hold of our eager fingers. Every day the ice cream man came with a song and his road sign. Every day I waited eagerly. One day I asked my mother how it was that we did not have money to visit Grandma in California, but she had quarters for ice cream. She answered me flatly, "Because I do not like to see you watching other children run to the truck, because even from the window, a child can taste the sweetness of sugar. Your throat swallows when other children lick their ice cream." In 1986, there was welfare reform, and there was an internal migration of Hmong people in America. My grandma came to live with us. In 2003, February 18th, my grandmother passed away in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, an ocean and continent away from the place where she had been born. At her funeral, this is what the man said to us. The words of the chanting man entered my consciousness slowly. It took my mind a while to pick up the rhythms of his speech, the lull of the Hmong language, the delicate subtleties of tone. He paced in front of the coffin slowly, the microphone held close to his mouth. The sleeve of his gray suit was a little too long. He looked at the sleeve for a brief moment, and then he was looking deep at the ground. Your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your helper, your friend is on her way now, walking the path to the land where they do not return. Her pack is heavy and she's walking alone, her steps slow. She remembers, she turns around. She sees me, a stranger on this lonely road, and she wonders over, are you returning? She wants to know. I look at her, the woman you knew and loved, and I say, I am only here to send the words back. She looks ahead on the road, she walks to the side where the short grass grows, and she sits down. Maybe you will see another woman who looks like your mother, but before you approach her, you should remember, your mother is no more. The hands that rocked you as a child, the ones that put you to her breast, are only a memory now. She sits on the side of the dirt path and wrings her hands. She loves you, but she cannot come back. The man said, she sits on the ground looking at her feet and says, I cannot return. She says, tell my children to stay together, to love their wives and husbands and teach their children as I would teach them, as if life could continue and death did not call. Do not steal, do not cheat, do not hurt, and do not take from others. She says the words that all mothers say to their children. She says her final hope. Be safe and stay good. Lead a life that was better, filled with less tears and heartache, more laughter and more love than mine. This is from the last part of the book. When it was time to hide the wind casket in the frozen earth, we all grabbed handfuls of dirt. In my palms, I warmed the dirt of America. I blew warm breath to melt its frozen edges. I let it slip from my fingers. I knew that my actions urged my grandmother's horse on its long journey to the land of our dreams. I promised my grandma that we will meet again, that I will be her granddaughter again in another life. I told her that we will not become the birds or the bees. We will become home, and we will build a strong home that we will never leave and can always return to. We will not be lost and looking our whole lives through. I said I would love her forever, even though she is in a new world and I remain in the old one. I told her to please not be scared. I know that her new life will be a good one. There will be no sickness or death, no fighting and no war. She will have peace and strength and her legs to walk far. Thank you. the secret war in Laos, where 2/3 of my people were killed. For every one of me standing and every one of you sitting in this room who's belonged to others didn't make it. Sometimes you hear a lot of similar names and you wonder why. There's a lot of do's, a lot of mi's, a lot of c's, a lot of cows. We forget that we have recycled names, that we were given names of those who never got a chance to live long enough, who never got the chance to say a real goodbye. My generation is the first generation to have kids where we can come up with totally creative names for them. We're looking at blue chias and jaias and all kinds of names that we've never had before. We're the first generation that's not trying to recoup for goodbyes. My father was so keen on saying this to me. He said that I was not a child of war and poverty and that I should remember this, that I was the child of hope being born and the captain to a beautiful future. In the camps of Thailand, 400 acres of 40 to 50,000 people, my father took me to the tops of the trees because he couldn't take me beyond 400 acres. He said that the world was a beautiful, beautiful place and that one day I would walk on horizons my father never saw. He said that the size of my hands and my feet would not dictate my life journey, that the work I would do will go beyond my gender, it will go beyond my culture, that it will be for a bigger humanity. I want to make these words real. That's why I'm here today. I'm here for you, because so many of you are so young, still looking to find where you belong, because so many of you work in education, because you're probing for the possibilities within those who come here to learn. I'm here not because I have a lot to say, but because I think that the message that I have to deliver is an important one. It would be selfish of me to say that I'm here speaking only for myself, because I know that I speak on behalf of a generation of young Americans. I'm very proud to say that a writer doesn't come from a family alone. A writer is made in a community. Did Charles Dickens know that when he was writing A Tale of Two Cities, and he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, that he was talking to a very silent girl in the public schools of St. Paul, Eastside St. Paul, that he was describing my yesterday and my today, and that he would be talking to my tomorrow. That is why progress matters, because I'm not beginning at ground zero. The poet McGrath, when he says, "You're out there so secret, do you think you're the only one?" He's right. I'm not the only one. The Chinese poet who once wrote, "You ask how it is at our parting. It is like the spring flower at summer's end." He was speaking to the poetry of my heart. And Rumi, that phenomenal poet that the world knows over and over again, when he says, "The second I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing that you were not in the world to be found, but that you were inside of me all along." Did he know that those words inspire a young writer into being? They didn't. But what I'm trying to say is that they did. Because when we speak to each other, when we give our words, we give pieces of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, we are more connected than not. If each of us leaves this room with a little bit more understanding in our hearts, we build immediately a more understanding world. If we leave this room a little bit more inspired, immediately the world is more inspired. That's the business that I'm about. It's the kind of writer I am. It's the work I'm out to do. I'm out to build a world that I want to live in, a more understanding world. And I don't know how, but I know that this book has opened up many, many doors. And I know that as a young person, power comes down to a very simple thing. And I know there's a lot of you in this room who are thinking along these lines, so this is important to share. When you're a young person, power is very little. Power is the ability to have people listen to your words and the work that you do. That's how you influence the world you live in. As we grow older, the audience for our work should grow, in theory, if we're walking in the right life direction. But a lot of people don't think about it this way. They forget that intelligence is only our ability to build relationships between seemingly different things. So the fact that I can take Charles Dickens' words and make them relevant and useful to my own life means that already a relationship is being forged in time and space. For me, language allows me to go back to the past, travel to the future, and probe for the possibilities of the human story. To harness and harvest its power, because I believe that the human story must have the power to change fundamentally and phenomenally the human life. Because I understand that when all is said and done, each of us in this room, all we have to give to the world is the wisdom and the strength of our stories. That is it, and that is all. Because at some point in time, you will be sitting by a window somewhere. Many of you are very young. But one day you will talk to your memories, the foods that you loved, the people who loved you, the places that you once stood. All of these places will be memories. We must live lives worthy of memories in the making. Memories as not only something we live through, but as moments even yet to come. That's what I'm here to say. It's what I'm here to do. And so at the end of the day, I can always only give you the sincerity of my thoughts. I can always open up a window into my mind so that you can begin to see how I process information and deal with them. But I'm here for you, and I know there's a lot of you. So I'm going to let your questions dictate the second half of this conversation. It's going to be a conversation. It's going to be an exchange of ideas. Because no teacher is an engine of learning. Every good teacher knows that you go on a journey together. You discover new things that you didn't know before, and that is when education is immediately and effectively of service to a community. So I'm going to be a good teacher. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to let your questions inspire the second half of this presentation. And I'm very good at waiting. Yes?
So what do you do to give time to yourself? So you can as for myself, I have a lot of things I do every day, but at least there's a 5-minute coffee break or something. That's usually what I look forward to. So what do you do as an activist and a writer and being who you are? What do you do to give time to yourself?
That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. So I have to think about it. So the book was published in 2008, April of 2008. Since the publication of the book, I visited over 200 colleges and universities, from Stanford all the way to Columbia and many places in between. Community colleges, liberal arts institutions, and then big research universities. And I've been busy trying to think about questions, not answers. We said this, we had a conversation at dinner, and I told Carl that I believe that the new generation of young Americans, for us, our goal isn't to answer the bigger questions of a bigger world. We should think of the questions. That's our job now. So I spend a lot of time thinking. As much as I spend talking, I spend thinking. I will speak with you, and I will be in conversation with you. But before I go to sleep tonight, there's always a period when I open up my journal and I write the last line of my day. For me, life is very, in this way, it's very clear. In the mornings when I get up, I write one line. That's the beginning of my day. That's the beginning of my story. At the end of the night, I write one more line. That's how my day ends. And then the next day begins again, and I get one more chance to fight again at being a writer in the world. But that's how I do it, I think. It is in that last line. How do I want to end today? I'm cognizant that every day when I get up, that there are at least 3 memories that I want to make, 3 things that I want to remember about my day. I have a memory. This is how my teacher taught me. She cared about me, and this is really relevant, I think, to the question that you're asking. When I was in 9th grade at Harding High School in the east side of St. Paul, I didn't talk at all because I was a selective mute. But one day in English class, I was sick and I needed to blow my nose, and I kept on doing this, right, which a lot of students do. Mrs. Gallatin came to me and she said, "Would you like to go to the bathroom to get some tissue?" That was the first time in my life that a woman beyond my mother noticed that I needed care and offered to care for me. And she taught me something so fundamental about the power of teachers. I never knew before then that they could touch to the heart of their students. But something happened. Now in a classroom when I'm teaching, and I teach sometimes, whenever I notice a student sniffling, I know they want tissue. I know they need tissue. I know to offer them that kindness. As much as I give, I also have to give room to get. So in these exchanges, when you ask me a question like that, you give me an opportunity to reflect. And in that space, in that time, I am myself. So that's how I recharge. Because now I know how I know that at the end of the day, I will write a sentence, and that's going to be the sentence of how my day ends. And you know how I build my sentences? I don't think, this is not how the reading process works. You're not looking for subjects, verbs, and nouns when you read. You are looking to inspire. That one word must have the power to inspire the other. Students cannot be forced to read. It's a chase after meaning, right? All writing is a sequencing of meaning. So when I'm writing, I think about, like tonight, for example, I think about one word and I'll build the most powerful word that I can with it. So for example, rain, right? Rain. Tonight we harvest the power of the rain and we allow the winds of humanity to blow it in a different direction, period. Who's gonna say that that's a weak sentence? Who can say that that sentence isn't true? That's a powerful sentence, right? And it's built very carefully because I'm very cognizant of the one word that I'm building my sentence along, because I'm so cognizant of the message that I'm delivering in the building of that sentence. That's when powerful writing happens. That's when you enable powerful memories to be made. So that's how I recharge. That's how I give myself time. Don't do coffee because coffee makes me high. But I deal with words, because they anchor me to the ground. If it weren't for language, I float along the lines of poetry and I never come back. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And if it doesn't, you just have to pull me right back and say I didn't get that. Otherwise, it'd be a waste of your question and your time. Okay? But that's how I recharge. Anybody else? You can ask me anything you want at all. My favorite color. So the thing is, I'll answer any way I want at all, and I'll still pull it where I want it to go. So we're just going to be straight up about it, right? Yes?
You mentioned lots of times that you had problems with, you had always had to deal with this language barrier. And when did you actually start to build confidence? Like in high school or in college? Because I myself, I'm dealing with the language barrier. I was raised in Germany and I just came here. So I was wondering, how do you deal with language barriers?
That's a really good question. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a part of my story. When I was 7 years old, we came to America when I was 6. When I was 7 years old, we went to Kmart, and my mom was trying to ask for light bulbs, but she didn't know the words, so she was trying to see the thing that made the world shiny. And the clerk did this, and then the clerk walked away. And I decided that the world did not need to hear my mom and dad, and it didn't need to hear me, so I stopped talking. Formally, I've only been speaking since April of 2008, since the publication of the book. I got through the same public school systems doing this. Every time a teacher said something, I would do this, and it was enough. At Carleton, I started whispering sometimes because I didn't want to be selfish and just absorb information. I knew that at some point in time we had to give it back. Because it is never enough to be a consumer of knowledge. At one point we become the producers of knowledge. I know that confidence is harnessed this way. The more opportunities you give a person to outgrow themselves, to go beyond themselves, the more confidence they build, then confidence allows us to get things done in the world. President Barack Obama says that confidence comes down to a very simple thing. It is when a person is able to live in accordance with the words that they speak. That is when confidence is being harnessed. So when I wasn't speaking, I wasn't delivering promises, so I had nothing to keep, right? Nobody had a standard to gauge my performance by. I began speaking because I thought I was speaking on behalf of something bigger, because the work that I was out to do was more important than who I was, because I'm a shy kid. A year and a half ago, at the launch of the book, I was red and I was stuttering and I was just fighting through the words. Today, I speak and my face is less red. My heart is beating, but my face is less red. Because it is like every other muscle in the body. The more you exercise it, the better you become at it. But you know, at the heart of it, speaking is a way to touch inside the hearts of others. Words are meaningless unless they can touch inside. So I speak, and somebody cries. And I know know that something has changed. I speak and somebody asks me a question, and I feel a kind of relationship in place. And so it is because of all of these things that I can speak to you today like this. Because I know I have an accent, but I was saying before to the group of engaged leaders and the Hmong women's leaders, I was saying, no matter how soft my voice is, it cannot dictate the strength of the message I stand to deliver. No matter how weak my voice is in English, it is still one of the strongest ones coming forth from my community. I know that it wasn't until the 1970s that the Somali students came into a written language. For me, it wasn't until the 1950s. But I know that there are a lot of young people out there waiting to harness the confidence to speak, on the page or off of it, but to be real, to be articulated in the world. It is a powerful thing to say that we belong in the bigger world of knowledge, that our stories, how do I want to say, I want to say it this way. I write with an accent. I think with an accent. I feel with an accent. For me, it is a powerful thing to say that just because we have accents is no reason for us to stay away from the bigger bookshelves of a bigger world. For me, it is a powerful thing to say that just because I stand here to speak with an accent today, it doesn't take away at all from the strength of my words. Because whether I get the tense right or wrong, whether I'm using the precise enough word or not, I think you will still get what I need to say, and that is the essence of communication. So it's how I think about it. But I think every person works, they work in accordance with a different set of time, a different set of circumstances. And it is the specificity of these things that dictate the voice and the position that we speak to the world from and with. For example, I know I will make mistakes tonight, but it is okay because I'm still new at this. That's how I see it, right? This is an opportunity to grow. I'm not looking for perfection. I understand that I can always only be the best of who I am. I wish I was Barack Obama sometimes. That could bring on some good times, right? But I'm not. Can't switch into Michelle right now either. Right? But I am Kao Kalia, yeah, and I am sure that I'm giving you the best of who I am. And I'm happy enough with that. And if I don't do such a good job, then tomorrow the sun will rise for a reason. I will get one more opportunity. And I hope I will do better. That's how I look at it. So one moment isn't the all, but I give myself to every moment, and that opens up the next. Yes, Carl, and then right here.
You know, when I hear you speak, I hear behind it that is sometimes, anyway, the act of translation. The labor of shifting from your original language to an adopted language. And I'm wondering if you're willing to share with us, again, the song of your original language, just so that we have a chance to hear that as well.
Yeah. Cô hay là muốn câu mà bây giờ cô hay là muốn đi giống gì không? Tôi lo vào cô này đấy thì cô yêu chúng ta cho luôn nó ít sự chỉ thuộc của mẹ là cô yêu nhiều nhiều. Tôi cô hay là muốn đi giống nhà đi nó thế giờ khi kia là cô nó. I love the language. It's a tonal language, so every breath I utter into the world carries meaning. In English, I'm continually struggling with breath. I have to wrap the air in my lung around units of meaning to make sense. I'm always struggling with structures. In the Hmong language, there are no tenses. In the Hmong language, the Hmong heart doesn't beat, it flutters. That does something to the poetry of me. And so when I speak English, it's kind of an act of translation, you're right. But it is very important that I say this. English is my first language on the page because I didn't go to school before I came to America. So the way I write in English is perhaps the way I speak in Hmong. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that this book touched me more than anything I've ever read. And I bought it for everybody I know as a gift for every occasion, and I think it's one of the most powerful things ever written. And you are just a beautiful writer, and there's so much poetry in your prose. And I'm wondering if you write poetry or have ever thought of publishing a book of poems.
Thank you so much. I'll go back and I'll tell my father that, and I'll make his night, the rain will go away for him. My dad is a song poet. The night we won the Minnesota Book Award for creative nonfiction memoir, and then the Reader's Choice for the Book of the Year. My father looked at me and he said something. He said, the night across the Mekong River, I knew that we would be alive, but tonight I know what it feels like to live. He said, from the moment you were born, you already belong. That so much of your life has been a fight for belonging. One of the greatest song poets that the world has never known. He goes to work and his supervisor tells him, B, you're here to talk to machines, you're not here to talk to me. The next day he goes to work and he's scared. He doesn't want to put on the shirt that says be a machinist because he says he will become just a machinist and he will stop standing there as a man. The next day he goes and he has on a white t-shirt and his shirt is wrapped around something and my sister thinks he looks lost. So she unravels the shirt to fold it for him and what falls out are two newspaper clippings from magazines. One of them is Carlton's The Boys With Me on the cover and the other is Disney's Wonder Time magazine with a chapter from the book inside. My father is not going to go and tell his supervisor. He's not going to show his supervisor. But the fact that he needs this as reinforcement to go in there again teaches me a profound lesson about love and about life, about the fragility of hope, but also the courage that we give those who make it possible. Because he was right. I never had my own story to write. From the moment I was born, I was already the stories that made me possible. Because when I think about this book, I think about my father. I think about so many other people like my father. And then I think about people like his supervisor. And I know there's work to be done. I'm so thankful for you because we started a revolution. The Associated Press published an article and they said it's been a difficult year for books. That unless you're the future president of the United States of America or you write about vampire love, or you're a little known writer named Kao Kalia coming from the depths of Minnesota, it's been a hard year for books. We're starting a revolution because people, the big press in New York are calling and they're saying, why is this book selling? And it is because of men and women like you. Minnesotans who believe in the power of the human story to change and transform the human life. Because here in Minnesota, we are home to more refugees than many, many other states in the nation. Don't know if you're cognizant of this fact, but it is true. While we're not very high up there for diversity, we are very high up there for refugees. Here we understand that the human story is more powerful than the places and the cultures and the languages that enable it. When I think about my father, I think about poetry because he woke me up just this morning. He says, get up, and I say, already? And my father says, the river is rushing. And we live in Andover, Minnesota, and there are no rivers. so I'm listening, right? Because he doesn't lie to me, so I'm listening. And I hear the roar of the highway, and I know a different river is getting up. In my mind, I want to know what the fast-moving train has to say to the long-flowing rivers. That's the conversation I went in on. When I see a tree and it's curved over the sidewalk, in my mind that tree wants to reincarnate as a rainbow in the next life. This is the sensibility of this young writer. I don't know how to tailor it. The real poets tell me that I don't qualify yet because I don't know how to read the empty spaces on a page. But all these theories and models and definitions that we learn in the classroom, we have to remember that they're only crutches to learning. They're only effective if they enable and empower us to act with them. So I have my own definition of poetry. It isn't about silent spaces. When I talk to a man who's just lost his wife or a woman who's holding her newborn, every word that they speak is poetry. And that's the kind of poetry that I do, I think. I take on life and I fill it through. So this new book that I'm working on, called Still, Comma, Fluttering Heart, begins with a poem, and it says, I loved you in the nation of my heart, and it is this very nation that has gone into revolution. And that's the beginning. So hopefully you like it. But I think that there's a secret too, that poetry is really about the speed of the reading, if that makes sense. For example, I'll look at a part in here, and it's a prose selection, but I'll read it slowly, and I think you'll feel like a poem, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Okay. And please do tell me if I'm wrong. The big tree in the backyard let down its leaves. Dry and casual, they flew in the yard in whirls at night. They flew into the meadow fence and stuck. Our backyard was framed by fallen leaves. Who's to say that that isn't a poem all its own, right? So I think a lot of it is in the speed of the reading, but the poets would disagree. And it's fine, it's legitimate, because I've done, in order to write the book, I did 2 years of research, so I read pretty much everything that had been written about the Hmong, because I knew that it would be one of the first, and I knew that I had to deal explicitly with questions of representation. So 2 years of solid research, but I didn't want to just regurgitate the information, because I was writing a memoir, and I knew that the memories were not just my own, the moments that I lived through, but they were also the memories passed down to me, and that we lived and functioned within the memories of a bigger world. But we came from a war that much of the world had chosen to forget. So when you're trying to carve out this kind of history, I think it almost kind of forces you to be poetic. But I speak very much as the daughter of a song poet. I cannot do the kind of thing that my father does to the language. But I think I hear resonance of his voice in mine sometimes. Yes?
When did you first fall in love with the sounds of words and like just the rhythm of poetry? From even like when you're talking about being in the refugee camp, you're always talking about the sounds around you of the people crying on their deathbeds, to the laughter of children, to the talk of the adults, and just all throughout your life, it seems to play such an influential role. When do you really remember falling in love with just words and sounds in general?
I remember being a 7th grader and being very frustrated. And I remember writing in my journal, because I came to America to become a doctor because I would heal what was so broken in our bodies. And my sister would become a lawyer, classic, right? Because she would protect us and afford us the rights that we've never had enough of. But I remember being a 7th grader and writing in my journal, how does a writer become? And pressing so hard that I destroyed the next page. So I wrote on the bottom, she keeps writing, period. I remember the first time I read Louise Erdrich, and she said, a girl cried into the bucket. She wipes the church down. The whole church weeps with her. And I remember being so excited because language had just exploded, because simple, accessible language had done something complex to meaning. And so I remember the high of that moment. Or when I read Leaves of Grass by Thoreau, and there was a part of my life when I started writing like every author that I read that I respected, and Thoreau said it was okay because that's how we explore voices beyond our own. That's how we harness the power of a voice, the voice of humanity. And I remember these moments, so they marked me in profound ways. But you know, the part that you read about, the part in the refugee camp years, and you can hear it, right? I say, on the bus, I sat looking at the people shifting around the seats and the aisles jostling each other to get to the open windows. The voices rose in sing-song motion. A woman cried out, "Mother, we part here. If we do not have the good fortune of meeting again in this life, I will be your daughter again in the next." A cacophony of words, of partings without the one word, goodbye. Instead they said, "We will meet again, we will meet again, we will meet again, if not in this life, then surely the next." Nobody told me these words, but all I have to do is close my eyes to hear them. So somewhere along the way, I held very tightly to them. And I don't know how that process happens. Sometimes people ask me, do you have an incredible memory? Why do you remember so much? But it's the nature with every memory that you deal with. If you ask questions of your memories, they will answer them. The more questions you ask, the more conversation there is. In those conversations, there are these things. And so I talk to my memories all the time. There are lessons that I would learn years after the fact, right? For example, I remember Mr. Payne at Murray Junior High School Math and Science Magnet. He says the essay is the foundation of life. He was a science teacher, right? I did write essays for him. I memorized whole chapters and then regurgitated them in 2 pages, right? Those weren't essays, I thought. And he said to me that they weren't essays. He just had to give me A's because I regurgitated all the facts that he needed, but that wasn't the essay. Because writing is when you go on a journey. Writing is when you take information and it means something to you, and you can begin to use it as a process of exploration. All of you have to write, no matter how old you are. This is how I know when I'm writing something good. when I discover on the page something about me and the world that I belong to that I didn't know of before, that's when it is effectively and immediately of service to me as a writer. That's when it's good stuff. And so every time I write, I go on a journey. I don't quite know where I'm going, but isn't that life? Like, I know eventually I'll be 6 feet under, and I know that all of you will be too. So that part isn't the surprise. The fun is that we get to be explorers, and we get to see what's around the bend, and we get to try to understand more, and that is the beauty, and that is the reward for living. And so this is how I approach it, and this is how I think about it. But when I think about these things, the words come to me. And I see it in words, and I see it in picture, and I see it come alive. Because I know that something happens on the page. I know that you become a producer, you become a director. You set up a scene and life happens. And so that's how I approach the world around me. And I don't know how to explain it, it's just how it is. But it is important for you to understand this. I come from an oral culture. My Uncle Ang says this: stories are like stop signs on the road of life. Their purpose is to make you pause, look both sides, check the trajectory of the horizon before you continue. Where am I going to find that in a book about stories in English? I have to remember it, because my uncle doesn't write. Because it's an oral culture. This has always been the way we passed down information, the way we passed down wisdom, the way we passed down love. So for me, there's tremendous pressure to remember these things. Because I know what happened after the Americans left in 1875. I knew that when the communist government came and they took over, they took the men and the boys, and they didn't say, we're going to take you and kill you. They said, we're going to take you and re-educate you. And I know that they never came back. That whatever they saw, whatever they went through, died with them on the jungle floor. For me, memory has so much work to do. The power of remembering is a power that we need to learn how to harvest, how to make use of in our everyday lives in a very keen way. But this is true of the Jewish experience. This is true of every other experience in human history. If we do not remember it, it will happen again. Much of the Vietnam War was not remembered, and so it happens again. In Iraq and Afghanistan right now, I know there are certain populations who are being commissioned to fight on America's side, and I know many of these populations are getting killed. And I know that in a few years we will read of the story from them, and we will be reminded of the truth of Vietnam, of the truth of what happened so many years before Vietnam. But it is very crucial that all of us in this room, that we understand this much. In theory, the secret war on Laos ended in 1973 with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. The Geneva Accords. In reality, we knew that it wasn't until 1975 that the last Arab American planes left the country. And that 2 weeks before the departure, there was a declaration of genocide against the Hmong. It is necessary to extirpate down to the root the Hmong minority. We know that it wasn't until 1975 that the war ended for my family, because they successfully crossed the Mekong River. We know that it is 2009 and that there's still some 800 families being persecuted from this war in the jungles of Laos right here, right now. So wars do not end. Dates are arbitrary. Information is what you do with it, right? So we have to remember. Anybody else? Yes, two big fellowships, right? One of them was the Dean's Fellowship, and that was a merit-based scholarship. Columbia gave 2 out a year, and they were half of my tuition paid. The other was the Paul and Daisy Stroll's Fellowship for New Americans, and this one is important because Henry Kissinger is on the board, and we know that Henry Kissinger had a lot to do with the Vietnam War and a lot of wars before and after the fact, right? One of the questions that they asked me for the finalist interview was, where would you be if not for this war? Would you stand here and say that wars bring on good things too? Would you be a writer on the hills of Laos, the mountains of Laos, if not for this war that had decimated 2/3 of your people? And I said, I don't want this money if that's the way it was going to go down. Because who's to say that those 2 others who fell outside did stand, that collectively all 3 of us couldn't have made a bigger impact on the world, or individually that one of them was brighter, had more to give than I. It was a surprise when I got a fellowship, to say the very least, because at this point most of the recipients had come directly from Stanford or Harvard. They were either in medicine or in law. Very few of them were writers, very few of them were law, very few of them were from tiny liberal arts institutions in the Midwest. So I went there on a lot of money, so I knew I had to do public good. With that said, there were a lot of writers. The average age of the MFA program at Columbia is 29. I was 22. I had never been to New York City before, so there I was for the first time in this big city, all by myself. And I felt I had nothing to give. Because in the classrooms and the workshops, I was reading these pieces. I was still a victim of the semicolon. These people were doing phenomenal things with the semicolon and more. So what I understood immediately was that I wasn't the most talented writer that I knew, right? But so many of these talented writers, they were still looking for their great stories. So they were writing about these little things that I wasn't really quite convinced of was important. But I would write these pieces, and in the reading process, I would cry. I knew that I had been born into a great story. So that's why the book was written, the moment I knew. And then I came back home and I said, I'm writing about us and the people that are listening. It empowered my family and my community because they got excited. They said, you're writing about us, when do we get to read the book? They said, are the people there really listening? As if our life had something to teach. And then I became convinced that their lives had something to teach, that our lives always have something to teach. And so there was another moment. But you know, I have to say that what I'm really good at is opening myself up to inspiration. That's my #1 skill as a writer. I'm not the most talented writer I know, but I'm really good at opening myself up for inspiration. So there were many nights when I walked around Columbia's campus feeling pretty sad about my writing abilities. And what I would do is I'd sit out there and I would look at the physics department. I would know that somebody in that building is looking for the cure to cancer. I'd look at the law school and see the light still on and know that some law student is cracking human rights and would never encounter it the same way again. And then I'd sit out there and say, I'm writing by the light of a more powerful moon. If the moon can pull the tides of the ocean, why can't it pull the words out of me? And that's how the writing was done, because of moments like that. So all along the way, there was no conviction, no solid conviction in my talent as a writer, but there was always tremendous faith in the power of the story. Because my favorite writer in the English language is George Orwell, not because I think he does anything phenomenal, but I think he always chooses to focus on the things that matter, to a bigger humanity with an H. And I thought this showed tremendous character, and it was such a big contribution to my understanding of stories and life. I don't fight for causes, I fight for people. For me, it's never an argument or a debate or rhetoric. It's about the human story and the human state. So I made these decisions. And in the writing of the book, the decision to speak, the decision to write, was a factoring of all of these decisions. Anybody else? Yes?
This is probably irrelevant to everything else, but
Yeah?
have you ever dreamed in talking in Hmong, like speaking Hmong?
Oh, do I dream in
Like,
Hmong?
yeah,
Oh, when I sleep? Let me think.
I mean, just because, well, I mean, I tend to look at things differently, but I'm just saying because you have such strong connections and love of words,
Mm-hmm.
and that when looking at visuals, like the Hmong words,
Mm-hmm.
that the way that you have like a wider range of like English vocabulary that I will ever have, but as for like finding words itself to fit in from the Hmong to the English, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the connection there, there's not a lot that, you know, you can find a Hmong word that represent certain words in English, or there's an English word for like a Hmong word,
Mm-hmm.
and then connecting with the dream just because it's random, but
It's actually not that random, and it's really irrelevant because I believe that there is no reason why we should live our lives as if it were our dreams. I don't want to live my life dreaming away. I want to live my life the way I've always dreamed I would. So for me, there is no difference in that question, and its relevance is really much pervasively my life. To be completely honest, when I want to say I love you, when I want to say I think about you, when I want to say you make me feel so special, when I want to say, right, do you want to share your dreams with me for a little bit, won't you? I say these things in Hmong. But when I want to say S-H-I-T and F-U-C-K and why the F-U-C-K, things like that, right? When I'm very angry, these things are in English. They're equally powerful and equally necessary to my life. My baby brother says it this way. He says, Mom and Dad are the Hmong from Laos, you are the Hmong from Thailand, I am the Hmong from America. Who's to say who's more or less Hmong? Shwali says, if you give me the best of who you are, and that is a Hmong heart, who would I be if I do not give that to my children? She's also right. So when I dream, I dream in both. It depends on what I'm feeling. If I'm angry, ooh. If I'm mellow and soft, it's very Hmong. But you know, I have to be honest, I can't pull the same punches that I can in English. I do different things in the different languages, so like the punches that I can pull in English, I can't pull in Hmong. It's very hard for me to look at an elderly Hmong person and to say, I think that what you're doing is wrong. And this is why it's wrong, because you're hurting this, and this, and the other, right? It would be so much easier in English. Because in Hmong, it would be too poetic to make the same impact. I would have to circle around this, I would have to circle around and it forces me to be more subtle, right? So the languages play different roles in my life. I read poetry in Hmong, and that's interesting to me. But the poetry that I write in English is no different than the poetry I write in Hmong, if that makes sense. Because I think meaning is meaning. The process of transliteration, conversion, that happens in my mind so naturally. For example, when I listen to a Thai song, and I understand about 50% of the Thai language, but I can only communicate about 25% of this understanding, right? But when I listen to a Thai song, I always get the main point. Like my favorite guy, he sings a song, he says, send me the pillow that you sleep on. English translation, right? In Hmong it works, in English it works, in Thai it works. When a Thai author is writing and they say, I'm walking beneath the sun and I can feel my hair heating up. I can feel it with every step I take, the pebbles underneath my feet. I can automatically convert that to English. And so something happens in the mind there. But if I dream about the love of my life, it's in Thai. I understand only 50% of the language, but it is in Thai, and it's substantial Thai. It's not the weak kind, It's like, can I make my home in your heart, It is like, why don't we take a ship and go up to the sky so we can be forever with the stars, right? It is substantial language that I don't do in English or Hmong. All done? Yep, go right here.
Do you think that the poetry in your written words come from your Hmong language? Because when you translate sayings and words, it just sounds like a very beautiful poetic language. And do you think that has influenced you when you're writing in English?
So much. I think you're such a sharp reader. Like so much. Like there's a part in here when I write, and these are my grandma's words that I'm filtering. And she says, and I'll have two examples so you can actually hear the difference. But there's a part when she's talking about my grandfather, how she has to marry him because she's an orphan and her uncle gives her away, although she doesn't want to because they're orphans and she wants to take care of her younger siblings. And she says, it's a longer paragraph, but I'll read it. She says, your grandfather wanted to marry me because his brothers thought that I could give him strong sons. He was a widower, old and already addicted to opium by the time he entered my life. His brothers thought that if he married me and I gave him strong sons, he might again feel life beat in his veins. I was the orphan girl in the village. I worked hard and I was not lazy. They knew this. So they came with bars of silver, horses, and pigs. My younger brother and sister could not take care of themselves. They were just children, so I did not want to marry. Your grandfather was old. I cried at the ground when my cousin agreed to the marriage. There was nothing I could do. I had to marry him. Later, years later, your grandfather's brother told me how he and all the men who came to arrange the marriage felt sorry for me. He spoke of how he kept on thinking that if I had had parents or an older brother, if they would have heard me cry, I would never have been forced to marry your grandfather. I cried so hard that the whole village came to watch my pain. How can I describe the cries to you? I looked at the sky and it was gray and blue, and I looked at my younger brother and sister and knew how hard their lives would be without me. And I looked at your grandfather and I could only think, if my mother and my father were alive, but they were not. So all I saw was the gulf in the sky. The poetry is embedded in the language that she's using. The poetry that I do in English, and you'll see why I live right on the line between Welsh and English. In prose, you're not supposed to be repetitious. Every line is supposed to further the narrative, right? So you're not supposed to repeat yourself. But I did, because in poetry, in English, you can do that. So I did it, right? So on page 240, when I enter my Uncle An's house, and my grandma is struggling for breath, and she's no longer conscious, and I say these things to her, it's very repetitious. When I saw that grandma was not listening, but struggling for breath, her hair matted with sweat, her lips opening and closing in desperation, her one tooth showing, the image became blurry. I got as close as I could to her. I felt the resistance of the bed rail against my thigh. I put my head on her chest. I said, Grandma, I'm here. I said, Grandma, are you okay? I said, Grandma, I love you. I said, Grandma, don't leave me. I said, Grandma, Delia is here. I said, Grandma, are you okay? I said, Grandma, I am here. I said the same things over and over, and my heart was heavy in my chest, and every breath became harder. I made a lot of noise. She raised a tired hand to my head, and she said, Grandma knows. And I said, I love you, Grandma. And she said, don't cry, may I? Grandma knows. She tried to say more things to me, and I tried not to cry, but neither of us could do what we wanted. In all the languages of the earth, and all the richness of words, there is no word, no comparison, no equivalent for my grandmother trying to be strong for me, for her one midnight. I think that answers your question. I live in the intersection. I have a divided heart, a heart that beats against its fluttering twin. And that is a beautiful thing, because when I encounter something, there's immediately and culturally speaking, two options around it. So the purpose of an education is to help us succeed. It is supposed to give us options into the life we live. At any point in time, I have at least two substantial options on hand, the Hmong option and the American option. And it is this discovery that opened the door to my being here with you. So that's how I want to leave you. That it is okay to have a divided heart, that if we can look into the divisions of our heart, then we can understand why wars happen. If one human being can fight against itself, herself, himself, then that's why humanity fights. And by understanding, maybe we can get to the heart of it. And we can begin to ask the questions that the world needs us to ask. We can walk away with the responsibility of trying to answer all of the world's questions, because our international affairs, historically, has not been so good. Because in the eyes of the world, we're still a nation fighting for identity. We're young. We're teenagers. We don't know yet our potential. We're only growing against ourselves, so it hurts. But for all of you in this room, I encourage you to live an experience, to understand that every day you go through is a memory in the making, and that your life will be a culmination of these moments, that every paper that you submit, every word you speak is a portrait of human time. It is always, and can only be, the clearest, most accurate portrait of human time. So to make that portrait worth something, to make it something beautiful. Thank you.